You're listening to Retail Disrupted, a podcast that explores the latest industry developments and the trends that will shape how we shop in the future. I'm your host, Natalie Berg. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Retail Disrupted. I have to start out by apologizing for being MIA for so long. I spent the first half of the month in the US visiting my parents and came back and went straight into a mountain of client work and events while also trying to get the kids back onto UK time, which is never easy. So I apologize. The podcast has slipped a little bit. I always knew it was going to be a busy month, but I do like to try to get at least 3 episodes out every month. And I have a backlog of interviews, so I'm definitely not short of content. It's just the time. So yeah, apologies for being MIA, but I'm very much back. And the good news is I have a ton of new content and new guests lined up for you. So just very briefly, the events that I have been busy chairing over the past couple weeks were the Richmond Retail and E-commerce Directors Forum and also the Retail Technology Show, where I chaired the sustainability and supply chain stage. As you can imagine, I've had so many great conversations with a ton of retail leaders. Uh, I am going to be bringing some of those conversations to you, including my fireside chat with Jeremy Schwartz, who is the ex-CEO at Pandora and Body Shop. I spoke to Jeremy live on stage at the Richmond Retail and E-commerce Directors Forum. He had a ton of great insights and anecdotes from his time at both of those businesses, as well as from his time at Sainsbury's, L'Oreal, and Coca-Cola. Jeremy was the brains behind Coke Zero, so we had a lot of interesting things to explore, and I'm going to be bringing that to the podcast in the coming weeks. So if you aren't already subscribed to this podcast, please do remember to subscribe so you don't miss that episode. And Retail Technology Show, I know a lot of you were there. It was great to bump into so many of you, the listeners of this podcast, old colleagues, clients, friends. It really is a great event in terms of just reconnecting with everyone. And I think there was a real buzz at the Olympia this year. So kudos to Matt Bradley, Carl Goodman, and the team for putting it together so seamlessly. Now, I had a ton of great conversations there with a number of retailers, Harrods, Asda, Co-op, B&Q, etc. We talked about everything from item level RFID to robot delivery. I mean, it was a real spectrum of retail tech insights. Now, unfortunately, those won't be resurfacing on the podcast, but I did want to share that Andrew Zenny, who is the founder of Nobody's Child, is going to join me on the show to talk about the launch of their digital product passports, which is a really, really interesting piece of work. So again, please do subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss that conversation with Andrew. Now, we're going to continue with the theme of retail tech on today's episode. And to help me do that, Deliveroo's Paul Wilkinson is joining me on the podcast. Paul is passionate about the future of retail and creating new shopping experiences. In his current role as product director for retail at Deliveroo, he's helping retailers provide quick delivery services to customers in a scalable way. In the past, he was instrumental in the creation and success of Tesco Labs, and he also built and launched advanced grocery voice shopping experiences on Alexa. Paul, welcome to the podcast. Today, we are going to be talking about something I think we're both very passionate about, which is how retailers can use tech to enhance the shopping experience. We're going to talk about Deliveroo. We're going to get your thoughts on quick commerce more generally, and also your recent move into non-food, which I'm sure our listeners will be really curious about. But you also spent time at Amazon and Tesco Labs. So I'd also like to get your views on things like voice shopping and frictionless stores, which we will come on to later in the conversation. So we have a lot to talk about, Paul. But if we start with quick commerce, now during the pandemic, we saw a lot of new disruptive brands emerge. And they emerged at a time where we didn't want to go into stores and it was really hard to get an online grocery slot. So they sort of came in and filled that gap. They promised to deliver groceries in just 10 to 15 minutes, which maybe seemed a little bit too good to be true. And since then, we've seen a lot of consolidation, a lot of these brands actually disappearing. And I'm curious to know from your perspective, Paul, what do you think went wrong? Because obviously this is a really capital intensive model and clearly their, funding is dried up. But what did they get wrong?
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? I think that, I'm not sure how much they really thought about this being a really scalable solution. Like, if you think it through to like the end, right? What they were really trying to do was set up a competitive supermarket. And if you went to a venture capital company and said, "Hey, I want to set up a new supermarket in the UK, which is the most, one of the most competitive supermarket, markets in the world," then most people with funding would probably think you were bonkers, wouldn't they? But if you think that, like, really what these companies were trying to do was set up a bunch of new convenience stores that were delivery focused, you couldn't walk into them. So they were playing like a model where you had to get real density in order to make this work. But you're really going up against, all of these established convenience store like chains and also like fascias. So, you got your Nisas and your like convenience store, buying models. Because what you're really doing here is you're having to try and compete with companies that can buy at colossal scale, right? You're going up against Tesco and Sainsbury's and also, like I said, like the wholesalers. And if you can't compete on their scale, then you can never make that business model work from when you also add in the picking and delivery costs. So I think that's kind of where they all went wrong. They all thought, right, well, here's a niche that we can serve and we can do this fast and so on. And they were absolutely thinking from the customer point of view, I think, which was, they were serving a need that was there and they got customers. But what they didn't quite think through, I don't think, enough was like, what was that actual end game? Like, because really what I think they were doing was launching a supermarket, and that's not really how they pitched it. And if they had a pitched it like that, people might have been a bit less certain, because I think they just naturally, you would just need to get so much volume, and it would be possible eventually. But like we saw, they just, it took them a lot of money to get there because they're competing with such an established, an entrenched market. And I think on things like just basic things like product margin, it's always going to be harder to compete when you're not doing the volume because you haven't got that margin to play with. And we know that supermarkets is a low margin business anyway, right? So you're really having to squeeze there. I mean, they weren't squeezing, whether they were just funding. So I
Yeah.
think it's really, actually how they talked about the dynamics and what they actually were. Maybe there was a bit of a gap there.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a really interesting point because they did do a good job of getting customers' attention, right? And I think maybe the kind
Yeah.
of lasting legacy has been that I don't know, that this idea of quick commerce or rapid delivery has been sort of propelled into the mainstream now. And we've seen, the likes of Deliveroo and other, your other peers in the industry possibly benefit from that. So I'm curious, yeah, to get your thoughts. Do you think that maybe as consumers we don't actually need stuff delivered in 10 minutes, but maybe we'll settle on 30 minutes, and we've had a taste for that uber convenience, but actually, there are some sacrifices that I think could be made on both sides.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it varies a little bit if you look at, the history of like Deliveroo and Uber Eats and Just Eat has all been through food, where actually, or like hot food, ready food, ready to eat, where I think the timing thing is probably, it's potentially even more important. Certainly we see with our customers, that if you don't want your pizza to arrive cold, right? And we do all sorts of clever things to like the maximum distance that will deliver a pizza is lower than the maximum distance that will deliver like an Indian takeaway, for example, because we know it doesn't travel as well. So there's all these sort of clever nuances that you can do. And then when it comes to groceries, I think we're trying to solve the customer problem, right? We want them to get their groceries quickly, but customers don't seem to mind quite so much if it's like 10 minutes or 12 minutes or 12 minutes or 14 minutes or whatever. And the way that the platform works is we just provide customers with that choice, right? Ultimately, like we're a marketplace. And actually, we have got quite a lot of partners on the platform who will deliver much faster. And then we've got some other partners that maybe have got more choice of products, but it'll take another sort of 10 or 15 minutes to get the product to you. And I think that balance is kind of where we've sort of settled. But it's where kind of partners have, shuffled around a bit, and their different expectations on something like a convenience store versus a supermarket mean that you've got that slightly different customer proposition. And yeah, we're not necessarily going to chase that 15-minute mission, especially here in the UK. I think customers seem pretty comfortable getting deliveries in like 20 to 30 minutes. And actually, if you looked at, certainly people that are living in cities, then, even where I live in the home counties, I can get a delivery pretty comfortably in 20 minutes most of the time, which is pretty good. And if you think about historically, that's amazing, right? The fact that
It
I can
is
actually get that
incredible.
for a reasonable amount of money, it's astonishing. Um, so yeah, I think thinking from the customer point of view, I think it's okay, but I don't think we need to like guarantee 10 minutes. Actually, in India recently, there's quite a few companies where 10 minutes is too long almost, right? It's interesting how it varies a little bit by market, but most of the markets that we're in, I think people are quite comfortable with getting groceries in half an hour.
Yeah, yeah, that's so interesting. I want to pick up on your point about retail partners because if I go on to the Deliveroo app now, I can buy groceries from Waitrose, Co-op, Sainsbury's, Morrison's, Asda, even Zap, which I thought was interesting because they started out as a rapid grocery delivery provider. And back in October, I had George Knott, the tech editor at the grocer. I had George on the podcast to talk about collaboration and how critical it's become in this space. Would you say that supermarkets today are generally more willing to test new things and fail fast? And also, I guess as a kind of second question here, what is it that attracts them to a platform like Deliveroo?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there are certainly during the pandemic that encouraged them all to be a bit more willing to think fast and fail fast and so on. And I think in many ways we can thank that for driving a lot of the pace of the adoption up. In the same way they saw their own online delivery services like spike massively. And I know that's since eased off a little bit. We're still ahead of where we would have been, were it not for that happening. So I think that probably did encourage them to move quickly. But they're definitely more open for collaboration these days, I would say. I mean, I spend most of my time, either developing new tools and tech and platforms for our partners, and then talking to them about that. And there are, I mean, there's varying different levels, even within a market, of competence and keenness to adopt new ways of doing it. But I would say that on the whole, they are pretty open to that. I mean, I guess if you think about the main reason they're doing it, though, is they want to experiment with this new model. They like being able to deliver stuff to customers quickly. Most partners in the UK don't have the capability to build their own fleet to do that themselves. I would say probably even
Hmm.
no partners. There's no one organization in the UK that's big enough to do that. Even if you look at certainly Tesco with Whoosh are kind of staying out of the marketplaces for the moment, but they're using the marketplace's delivery services. They're using Stuart and Uber and so on to do the actual deliveries. They haven't built out their own fleet, right? Which is
Mm.
what everyone kind of did with the van thing. And any attempts to try and harmonize van fleets and reduce, and make more efficiencies there have never really taken off. So I think having this third party fleet, I think works really nicely for them because it means you can get that customer service. There is, well, it depends where you are, but there is always a rider ready almost, if you use one of the big networks like ourselves or Uber. And they just wouldn't be able to build that scale themselves. Like this delivery game, in fact, any grocery delivery game is a density game, right? It's about the density of picking in store so you get efficiency, and it's about the density of deliveries. And if you can't build that density by yourself, then the only way to do it is to join a platform that can give you that density.
Yeah. Yeah, and I want to come back to density when we talk about non-food, but I do have one more question about grocery and specifically the consumer and the customer mission. So have you noticed a change in customer mission? So is it still a case of shoppers using the app for food for tonight, those kind of crisis shopping missions, or are shoppers using Deliveroo as kind of more of a top-up shop or part of their regular routine now?
It's a ridiculously broad spectrum. I mean, it's a bit like saying, what do people shop in Tesco for, or what do people shop in Sainsbury's for? Like, we get, most people do come to the platform initially because it's an emergency like situation. They need some more nappies, or it's that they're at a party and they're out of beer or that sort of thing. But we do see customers evolving over time, and we also see like just the general population evolving over time, and we see much more. Like today, we see a lot more like top-up shop behavior, like you describe. And there's still a lot of opportunity in that space, but the ability to provide a wider range of products and still get it pretty reasonably, pretty fast is, I think, very appealing for customers compared to, for example, like ordering a van delivery for next day. Or occasionally you might be able to get a van delivery for same day, if you order before 12 o'clock and the delivery is like after 6 or after 7 in the evening. So because I guess that's the limiting factor on any other delivery mechanism, then we think there's a really good opportunity, and we're seeing it from customers, ordering, a little bit more, maybe food for a couple of days and so on. It varies by partner
Yeah.
though, and it varies by um, whether customers have scheduled a delivery or not. Like, so even on delivery, you can schedule a delivery, but only for 24 hours, and only if a partner has chosen to turn it on, and so on. So
Oh, you
there's
can
a whole load
schedule
of
it.
other
I didn't
things that, like,
realize
it
that.
depends.
Yeah, that's
You can on
interesting.
some partners, yes.
Yeah.
But it's not a widely adopted feature. It's not what we're known for, right? We're known
Yeah.
for, what do you want? I need this, pretty quickly, right? And we're good at getting that. So there's a lot of opportunity there, but I think definitely today we are seeing already a huge bunch of missions. In fact, so I was in UAE last week, and at a Waitrose store in UAE, which is a franchise run by Spinneys, who are a grocer out there. We saw a huge order go through, and it was mostly like fresh fruit and berries, like, and it was, which is a very expensive thing to buy in the Middle East. But
Yes.
it was a huge order. It clearly wasn't just someone emergency purchasing, something that they needed straight away. This was like someone who was obviously, I don't know, not like they were having a party for a lot of people with a lot of soft fruits. But people buy all sorts, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just speaking from personal experience. I used to be really organized and do, a big weekly online grocery shop, and then that was it, done for the
Yeah,
week, and I didn't have to think about it. Whereas now, I don't know, I just feel like I'm using apps and I'm doing more top-up shopping and just thinking about, all right, what are we as a family going to have for the next couple of nights? And I probably should be a little bit more organized, but I just love the convenience and the accessibility that just didn't exist a few years ago. So I've definitely changed the way that I
that's
shop.
right. And that is kind of reflective of the grocery industry overall, right? Like, if you look at, like, over the last 10, maybe even 15 years, there's been growth in convenience and there's been growth online. And, we're at the intersection of that. We're online convenience. So there's growth, right? And I think that is, it's that changing consumer mindset, like you just said. People can get it. And once people get used to it, they order a lot. Like, it's, yeah, it really is a convenient service.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Now, Paul, I want to talk about your move into non-food because this, for our listeners who aren't aware, a few months ago you announced this pretty major strategic shift that Deliveroo would start offering non-food products with the launch of Deliveroo Shopping. And this covers a wide range of categories like pharmacy, DIY, homeware, toys, and pet care. And it's probably worth reminding our listeners as well that you already had an existing relationship with WH Smith and Boots, but this feels like a very different thing. So, Paul, can you talk us through the rationale for this move? And was it a case of just kind of noticing that shoppers were searching for these items and not finding them? Or was this maybe always part of the plan?
I guess it's probably a mix of all of the above, right? We've like, actually, the first launch of grocery was actually about 3 or 4 months before the pandemic. Co-op, I think, were the first partner on the platform, where it was like, look, we've got this fleet of riders and that can deliver stuff really quickly. What else can we use it for, right? Because every additional order, like I said, it's a density game. Every additional order helps, right? So grocery obviously has gone very well for us. We've now got pretty much all the major grocers in most of the markets that we're in on the platform, and that's building a good amount of density. And in some markets, especially like the UK, it's very popular and is now a sizable proportion of the platform. I think if you look at, well, we haven't published this year's results yet. So if you look at last year's results, it's like 9% of the total volume of Deliveroo is now groceries. So the idea is that, because of a mix of, like you say, customer signals, we've spoke to customers like, oh, it would be really good if I could also get this. We definitely look at things like search data on the platform as well. What's a dead end search, and just knowing generally that if we get more density in the network, that's a really good thing. Then that kind of the next straightforward, like, expansion for us seemed to be, well, why do we just stop at the grocery stores? Why don't we bring the whole high street to the customer? And I think that's the really interesting opportunity that we've gone for, predominantly in the UK and the UAE today. Those are the two markets where we've been focusing that for. But as it will come to more markets in the future too, right? It's definitely a big strategic change for us. We've got, I think we said back in October, we did an investors event, and we published like our 3-year plan, to turn this into a really sizable business, pretty similar to what the size of the grocery business is today. So I think it's exciting, right? It's a whole bunch of new partners, whole bunch of new use cases. It's a mix, like you mentioned some of the different kinds of partners we've got, but some of it's like emergency purchases. And some of it is slightly more considered purchases. We did a big push into gifting before Christmas. You get this nice little, like, animation of a gift unwrapping when you send it to somebody else. So there's all sorts of possibility for expansion. Obviously, things like Screwfix are less likely to be gifted, but excited to have big partners like that on the platform.
I think my husband would very much appreciate anything from Screwfix for Christmas. So there's
I
maybe some
mean, so would
exceptions
I,
there.
and like,
That
I've been I've been renovating my own house in the last year, since I moved into it, and I don't have so Screwfix have their own rapid service, which is fulfilled by Stuart, and really
yeah.
frustratingly, it doesn't exist in my area because I would have spent a
Uh,
fortune on that because having to interrupt the job halfway through and leave to drive 15 minutes to go to Screwfix, pick up that pack of screws or literally whatever it is you need a bit more of, and drive back like is so you could have spent that half an hour actually working. And I mean, if you
yeah.
imagine what professional builders and stuff must do, yeah. So I mean, you can see that Screwfix Rapid is obviously a successful proposition by itself, but we'll be able to bring that to far more customers, and I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting. I could really see the use case in things like DIY and electricals for exactly the reason you laid out. And I just to bring in a little stat here. I saw that Screwfix stores are within 20 minutes of 95% of the UK population. And I guess you could interpret that,
Yeah,
in one of two ways, because you could argue, oh, there's Screwfix, close enough. Why would we need rapid delivery? But actually, I would interpret it the way that you've just laid out, that actually, you don't want to be interrupted when you're in the middle of a DIY job. And that density, I guess, enables you to kind of deliver those products in a more kind of financially sustainable way. So I think that's super
yeah, that's
interesting
right. And I mean,
stuff.
we need the store network in order to be able to deliver it to a large amount of the population, right? Because we're not doing long distance deliveries. We're doing deliveries of a few kilometers at Deliveroo, which means that if you've got that density or you've got a store nearby that can get it, because we've got a huge number of independents on the platform too. It's all about just connecting those two people together. Like we're not gonna, if you're a brand that has a couple of warehouses that cover the whole country, that's not really a case that we can get involved in. But if you've got a few shops around the place, which a lot of companies do, then it's really interesting.
Now, you have this machine learning based search and discovery functionality, which allows Deliveroo shopping users to browse for a gifting occasion in the app. So, for example, searching for someone's birthday. And I thought this was interesting because then you're presented with a curated list of options. And I'd love to hear like a little bit more about this and where maybe you see this going because I mean, I personally found this interesting because earlier this year at the Consumer Electronics Show, Walmart in the US unveiled a very similar search experience. Again, where shoppers can search by specific use cases rather than individual products. And it's this move from scroll searching to goal searching. And I absolutely cannot take credit for that phrase, but I love it. And I think that just sums it up. So, what do you think about this? And how, I guess, more broadly, do you see AI helping to improve the customer experience?
There's a lot of areas where we're investing, partly driven by retail and grocery, and just the way that people use search differently to how they use it on restaurants as well, right? So it's a huge area of investment for us because restaurant customers generally do scroll searching. They want to just browse and be inspired, or they pick the one that they always order. Like I think I remember a stat from a few years ago that like 80% of Domino's orders are just the same as the customer ordered the exact same last time. People don't change, right? So people have habits, but search and I guess grocery to some extent because you might be looking for like that niche thing. Preserved lemons is usually the thing that I use. Is like you're not going to browse for that because you don't necessarily know which category it's in. But also this ability to just browse for like a specific thing like gifts. So we've got all these tiles on the top of the app now, and if you tap on those, then you get a curated selection. And the curation is a mix at the moment of manual and machine learning based. But we've invested a lot in like the underlying catalog at Deliveroo that kind of has all these metadata and all these tags and things, so you can then automatically generate these experiences for people. And you can also obviously take their personal preferences and their order history and stuff into account as well when you're like ranking those. So there's a lot of exciting stuff there. And when you talk about like the AI stuff, we haven't really explored this too much publicly in the grocery space yet, but actually there's an experiment going on at the moment with about 50,000 of our top customers in London on the restaurant side where they can like ask Deliveroo, so they can say, hey, I want something that's healthy and Asian, but not too spicy and doesn't have any dairy in it, for example. And using like a OpenAI APIs, we now deliver them some like responses to that question that says, oh well, why don't you try these things? And that can be either
Oh,
menus or
wow.
individual partners to recommend that stuff. So that experiment is going on, and I think we're pretty good at adopting new tech and that sort of thing. Like we all have access internally to it's called Roo GPT, but it's basically just like a an internal version of ChatGPT. that means that
Mhm.
all of the data and stuff, is all in house and this sort of thing. So we've been quite good at adopting that and the tooling and giving those tools to our own, our own teams and to some of our customers to test out as well. So it's exciting. I think, AI gets a lot of hype, obviously, in retail, right? And I can talk about that by itself for hours. But actually using, really the cutting edge of AI and not just doing like linear regression or, basically statistical techniques to try and improve your forecasting, which kind of everybody does, or well, not everyone does, but everyone should.
Everyone
And some
should,
people have
yeah.
been doing it for a long, long time. That still often gets called AI. But if you look at like, Tesco and Sainsbury's have been doing sales-based ordering since the 90s using those techniques, and some retailers haven't even joined that bandwagon yet. And even some big national grocers only really joined, doing things that way a few years ago as well. So, like I said, right back at the start, we still see a really big spectrum of capability um, in the retail partners, and that obviously impacts how quick they are to adopt new things and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is really exciting. It's an exciting time to be in retail, and um, with AI, yeah, you're absolutely right. You do have to separate the hype from the reality. But I think that it really kind of exciting aspect of AI is that it is solving genuine pain points. It is genuinely going to make the customer experience better, and that's something that all retailers should really be aiming for. So I mentioned at the start that you also worked on Alexa shopping during your time at Amazon, and I know you have some opinions on frictionless stores as well. So maybe, Paul, if we start with voice shopping, in my opinion, this hasn't taken off in the way that some people predicted that it would. So, what are your thoughts on voice commerce today?
Yeah, I agree. It hasn't taken off in the way that, even I would say that I thought, right? I think, we did some early days experiments at Tesco when I was in the labs team there, predominantly on Google, but we also had this integration through If This Then That, which lets you put stuff in your basket through Alexa as well. And the like when we did like customer research and stuff, the convenience of it, if you can get a customer to start adding stuff to their basket or their shopping list or whatever by voice, the convenience is amazing. And I still really believe that to this day. And I use Alexa shopping lists like as my primary shopping list because the ability, like, certainly because I used to work at Alexa, but also even before that, I have Alexa in most rooms of my house, right? And Google actually for Google Assistant. So the ability to add stuff to your shopping list anywhere without touching anything or doing anything, is brilliant. And I, personally am a big advocate of that. But the conversion to a basket and actually, buying stuff is not that straightforward, right? If you want to buy it on Amazon, then yes, you can convert that to an Amazon basket or a Whole Foods basket or I guess a Morrison's basket in the UK. And that all works quite nicely. But let's be honest, most of the population don't buy their groceries through Amazon, right? That's just the matter of things. And it doesn't,
That's
even
the
in the
first
US, it's the
barrier,
same.
right?
Exactly. So, but a lot of people do use the shopping list features, right? And actually, the most common names for the shopping list are things like other retailers, like Tesco or Walmart or Costco in the US in particular. So the um, the ability to have that shopping list and use it to build a basket somewhere else, I think, is really handy. I used to use the Tesco, skill quite a lot that joined the two together. Ocado had one as well, but they've all stopped doing it because I think the customer adoption's been terrible. Because
Yeah.
discovery on voice is really hard. Telling people that they can do these new things is really hard, and people don't like it when if Alexa or Google suggests that, oh hey, did you know you can also do this? People interrupt and say no, stop, go away. Even if it's something that might actually be useful for them. So I think it's a really tough one. And from previous like customer studies, again, like even from before I was actually at Amazon, and from some of the data that I know when I was there, if you can get people to start using it, then they love it. But getting people to start using it is phenomenally difficult because that discovery piece is just really hard. It's not like they have the app on their home screen that they see all the time. So yeah, so I'm not quite sure as where the future of it is. I love the fact that you have this like ambient intelligence that just you can ask questions and it can do things like your shopping for you. But at the same time, and the mass adoption of that is difficult, even though actually, so many households have an Alexa in them, and everyone uses them for the same things, like, like music, is
Yeah.
really common. Everyone knows that Alexa does music. Like even like household timers and other things like that. Everyone knows that Alexa does that and uses that all the time. But getting people to understand all the different things Alexa does is really hard. So I'm still kind of bullish about the overall utility of it because I think I just think it's a really easy way to shop, and I think that once Alexa or whatever voice assistant knows what you mean by milk, right? Does it, for me, it's like 4 pints of semi skimmed. Once it knows that, then that just makes your shopping journey so much easier.
Yeah,
And I think we
especially
still
because
haven't really solved the problem.
yeah, I mean that's a really good
Yeah.
point because especially when you think grocery shopping is habitual, right? And it is a chore for many of us. So
Yeah.
if you can take some of the heavy lifting away, then that is, that's got to be a win.
Most
But
people buy the same 100 grocery items again and again and again. Like,
yeah.
there's not, most people cook the same 8 or 9 dishes again and again. Like, people are
Yeah.
creatures of habit, right? And we should be able to solve that. But actually, if you go on any of the major grocers today to try and build a basket, then there's not an easy way of generating your whole basket. Yes, you've got your favorites or your usuals, or Ocado will have a stab at building a basket for you, but then it's not regular enough to be really predictable, and it's
Mm,
not irregular enough to put the whole onus on the customer. So there needs to be, I think, a better way of building a shopping basket, because it's a bit tedious. You said you did a big shop online once a week. So many people
yeah.
do a big shop online once a week. I normally do a big shop online once a week, but it's basically, you're just scrolling through a list and clicking on things. It's not inspirational, and it's not fast. But so I think there is still room in this space for someone to create something that's amazing. But I'm not quite sure what the UI looks like, or the voice, the VUI or GUI or whatever. I don't quite know how that looks, but I feel like there's still an opportunity there for someone to make something amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. We'll have to check back in a year or two and see where we are.
Maybe
Paul,
even longer than that. I think that's the thing. It's been talked about for so long, but it's not got there. It's a bit like the frictionless stores thing, which I know you want to ask about too. It's one of these
true.
things. Like, there was an IBM, I think, RFID advert from about 1999, 2000, where the guy walks around the store shoplifting. Well, it looks like he's shoplifting. He's putting supermarket goods into his inside pocket in this massive trench coat. Then he walks out through like an airport metal detector and picks up his receipt, and he's like, "Ding, done." And so that concept of picking stuff up and leaving, and it all paying automatically, has been around for now probably 25 years at least. But we're still not at the point where it's mass adopted, which is also fascinating as well, right? It's very similar to the voice thing. It's an amazing experience. I think everyone agrees that, or most people would. Yes, some people want to talk to somebody at the checkout and so on and so on. But if you
Mm,
went to, round the corner here, you've got the Bishopsgate Tesco store, which is really busy, queues out the door at lunchtime. Most people in that store would be quite happy when they're buying their meal deal at lunchtime to go in, pick up the stuff, and leave, right? But we're not quite at that place where every store has that. We're not even at the place where 100 stores have that. We're kind of at the place where like 20 stores have that, which has its whole own issues and reasons. But I still feel like it's another one of those things that I think the problem it's solving is real, both for customers and for the retailer, but we just haven't got to that tipping point of adoption because of the complexity or the awareness or the cost, I guess, in this case as well. So yeah, it's fascinating, but it's not a new problem. I always remember. Sorry, keep on going on. Remember, Tesco used to have the shopping list of like customer expectations back in probably about when I started at Tesco, so sort of 2010. And it was
mhm.
like, I can get what I want. The aisles are free. I don't have to queue. I'm sure there was another couple, but those things, those challenges in retail have never gone away. They're timeless, right? They don't. It doesn't matter how you're buying, whether it's online or in store. You don't want to have to join a queue. Look at people buying Glastonbury tickets or whatever for the online example. Like, you want to get the products you want. So availability has always been really important. And if you go into any retailer now in the country, there'll be gaps on the shelf, right? Because no one can quite fix availability completely. It's hard. The aisles are free. That's just about staff and keeping the place tidy and stuff as well. Again, a constant sort of battle is the wrong word, but like, effort required to do that. So those problems, they're kind of, they're forever problems. And everyone's always trying to get better at them. And I think, some of the things like just walk out tech is a really good way of solving, a significant chunk of that problem. But it's still they're hard problems to solve, right? And they're not going to disappear overnight, even if you throw all the money in the world at them, as some people have tried.
Well, what do you think is the biggest barrier? Because you talked about how expensive the technology is. You talked about how consumer adoption still isn't great if you don't have enough stores actually offering this. At the same time, I think from a customer experience perspective, for me, I just feel like there's a fine line between seamless and soulless, and I think some of these stores are probably guilty of taking too they're cold and
A bit too far on the soul list.
they've gone
Mm.
too far on the soulless side, yeah. And also interesting to note that you've got supermarkets like Booths stripping out self checkouts altogether. So they're going, in the completely opposite direction. So I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of moving parts, but I agree with you. I still feel like this is a perennial problem, and whoever cracks this, that's going to solve a really big piece of the grocery puzzle. And it does feel like there's appetite. It does feel like there's, to your point earlier about supermarkets being more willing to experiment and fail fast and try new things. It does feel like there's a lot of experimentation happening, and also maybe it's just a case of this kind of experience being limited to those really time sensitive shopping missions. You mentioned, office workers on their lunch break, or, hospitals, stadiums. We're seeing a lot, airports. We're seeing a lot
Mm,
of that with
yeah.
Amazon's collaborating with those types of destinations. So I don't know. I feel like, yeah, I personally feel like checkout free has a pulse, and it's gonna continue to evolve, but there are still barriers. So I don't know. Do you think, Paul, if we come back here in 10 years time, 2034, do you think checkout free shopping will be the norm?
I think in high density stores, yes. So like, I absolutely think in the city of London, like where I'm sat now, uh, all of the places where you can go and buy lunch, I think there will be a huge shift in that. If you go for 10 years towards that, yeah, because that's really where the business case is for a lot of this stuff, right? Or it's like, if you think about how much store space you have to give over to checkouts, even, right? Where you could have product out that's selling, like that's huge opportunity just by itself, right? And then you've also got, better stock on top of that. You've got a better customer experience. You've got no queuing. You've got all these other things you can layer in. Then, there's super dense stores in central London or the center of very large cities. I think that is definitely where the opportunity is. It's also, though, I guess, where the opportunity was slowed down the most, again, because of the pandemic, right? It's funny how it just keeps on coming back into everything. But, those are the stores that had nobody in them for 2 years and only really now picking up back to like where they were in the before times. So, like my train this morning was packed, like the busiest I've ever seen it since pre-pandemic, when that used to be normal. So I think that is definitely partly to blame for like the adoption curve and the sort of the state we're seeing it. But still, cost is a big thing, right? Because and especially, I guess, if you're Amazon or if you're anyone that's opening new stores, then including the cost of the cameras and stuff in the bill of materials for opening a store is much less of a thing than going back to a store and saying, right, we're going to refurbish this store. And actually, my bill of materials for refurbishing is bigger than it would have been if I was building one from scratch. And, we talked earlier about new entries into the grocery market, just not really a thing. So
Mm.
it's, apart from Amazon in the last couple of years opening about 20 stores in the London, broadly in the London area, then no one is really opening new grocery stores, which means it's hard to then include that camera and the tech and stuff in your initial bill of materials and in your initial return on investment. So the refurbishment model is hard as well. And you don't want to close these stores because these stores are doing big transaction numbers during the week. So it's a really fine balance in the cost as well. And even just the cost of the hardware and the cost of installing all the wires and stuff, right? It's non-trivial. Even though, I think Amazon publicly said that they'd they've basically reduced the cost of the hardware to about 2% of what it was when they first opened the first Amazon Go store in Seattle. So they've made huge inroads,
Wow.
and the consumerization of technology has all helped towards that and so on. But the cost is still, it's expensive. Like it's more expensive than putting in a small bank of checkouts. Like, so it is, it becomes a really tricky job to figure out, well, how are you going to pay for it as a retailer, right? Because retailers don't tend to have huge amounts of capital to deploy. Um, and also then, what's the return on investment? Does it meet your bar? Like, a lot of retailers have really high bars for the return on investment time for any particular, project, and they prioritize ruthlessly according to that for the best return on investment is what you do, right?
Mm.
But actually, so that means that ruthlessly, like anything that delivers like a 2 or 3 year return for a lot of retailers just won't work, right? You're never going to get to that part of the list. So it has to keep on getting that sort of more efficient, cheaper, you know, and I think the technology will do it because you get fewer cameras, fewer sensors on the shelves. Like most of these just walk out stores still have still got like weight sensors on every single shelf, right? And that's just not feasible. Like I'll go back to another Tesco number just because that's what I know the best. But Tesco used to have about 5,000 miles of aisle in the UK, um, and even if you cover all of the shelves in Tesco in one layer of office paper, it's like 8,000 tons of paper or something silly. It's like 12 jumbo jets, which is like, so you can't ever cover all of the shelves in a layer of paper because it would be a ridiculous thing to do. So covering them in a sensor is even more ridiculous, right? So this just shows how unscalable anything that requires anything every single shelf, even, it's a bit like electronic shelf edge labels, right? I can give it so many examples. The reason they've not taken off is just because the return on investment just isn't really there. And you need so many of them and they're so expensive that it becomes a significant part of your capital. So it's almost like in some of these ways, these things are not tech discussions, they're finance discussions. Like it has to have the right business case, the right hurdle rate. Otherwise, you're never going to actually invest in these things because they're just too expensive, regardless of the amazing benefits they might bring you.
Thank you for listening to Retail Disrupted. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the podcast, please leave a rating or review or share it with others. It really makes a difference.